Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Welcome to another fine day here at Revolution. I've tried something with my light and I realized why people don't like me to wear hats when they use lighting. I put the lighting up top and it's sitting down, so now I have this dark eyes. It's like I'm Batman. Welcome to Revolution. Glad you're here. Good morning. Good morning. I don't know if you saw my little video I put up on Instagram, but I said, I'm not quite prepared. So I work when I can. My part-time work is I'm doing painting. And so I got a job yesterday, so I went in for that. It was in Renton, like deep Renton, which was pretty far away. But anyway, did that. Not complaining, glad to have it. Well, welcome back, Casey. No problem. Revolution is always the place. We are a church that you don't have to be at. That's what I always say. Revolution. When we were in New York, I remember I'd see people on the train and they would be like, all of a sudden they'd have that guilty face of like, I haven't been at church. And I would be like, no, it's fine. That Revolution is for people who don't like to go to church regularly, so don't feel pressure. Never wanted people to feel pressure. I felt so much pressure as a young person. Oh, we missed you on Sunday. You know, that kind of like passive aggressive thing. So, that wasn't my favorite thing. So I've always wanted people to know, like, hey. And that's the great thing about now is we're on YouTube, which you can like and subscribe, and podcasts. So you can catch up whenever you need to. Unless if you missed some of the, like that one, hardest one would be catch up with is when we did Galatians, and we'll do Galatians again in January. But we did 14, 15 weeks on Galatians. I don't know. We did all the scholarship. So I'm going to try to find out another fun thing we can do with Galatians the beginning of next year. Anyhow, all that to say, I got called into work yesterday, which was good because I need the money. And so my talk is a little bit in not the complete finished phase, but I've always seen my talks as a type of art anyway. So I kind of like bringing you guys in and to kind of like show you how I work through these things. So there you go. So I've been reading, another thing is I've been reading some really heavy books, I've been reading a lot lately. And that will do it too. And you get your mind full of all this different new information. So I'm going to share with you guys what I'm reading right now. So I'm reading this book by Todd McGowan called Embracing Alienation. Why we shouldn't try to find ourselves. And heck of a subtitle. And then I've just started reading this. The Rebel by Albert Camus, and also just got this book, Christian Atheism. What? I like Slavoj Žižek. Pete Rollins got me into him. I got to see him speak a couple times, once in New York and once I think in Minnesota, but he's an interesting fellow, and this is interesting stuff. He always has really interesting stuff that makes you think and makes your brain hurt because you like, oh, I didn't think about it to that level, to that depth. So those are the books I've been reading, and I like to read philosophy and theology and biblical scholarship to kind of help shape the work we do here. And it's the basic same message is grace. Grace. You are accepted, and helping us accept others. So as I was kind of working through this, I got home from work yesterday and I was just done. So I was like, okay, I'll get up early and work on this. And I was really feeling done this morning. So I drove and got a cup of coffee and looked at this a little bit. And I thought, I'll just kind of share with you where I'm at and what I'm learning. And maybe we'll see where this goes next week, or even through some of the like mini vignettes during the week if I've got time to do those. Forgive me for yawning. But some of the things I've been reading about is community, which has been great because I just gotten finished reading White Poverty by Reverend Barber. And that was a lot about community as well and about bringing people together through poverty and different things like that. This book here is not an easy book. Todd McGowan's great. I got to see him speak when I was in Belfast doing some stuff with Peter Rollins. And he wrote that book on Hegel that is, Emancipation After Hegel, which has just changed my life and got me into Hegel. And I can't recommend that book enough. He's written a lot of great books on capitalism and different things like this. But this book is really hard to read. And I'll be honest with you, I was just kind of feeling like it was just dragging, just kind of going slow. And then I got near the end and I got to this the chapter on community, and it's worth the price, the whole price of the book, the whole thing on community. It's really interesting, and it talks about community in such an interesting way, and the ideas of like, these ideas of community that we often don't realize that community always needs an outsider. Communities always need a them in a way, to like people who aren't involved in the community to be a part of the community. And he talks about embracing alienation, which I thought I was great at embracing alienation because I was like, oh, I would like to be alone and sit in my house and read. And it was kind of like, that's not really alienation. Alienation is really like going to the park where everybody is equal and everybody is different. You don't know what person's religion is. You don't know somebody might smell different than you. Someone might, they think different than you, or the public bus or riding the bus. You've got this complete type of alienation. Often you'll see people on the bus and they're reading, or on the train, you got your headphones in, these public spaces because we feel kind of alienated. We don't feel like we're in with our tribe or our group or people we're comfortable with. You never know who's, maybe a homeless person's going to sit right next to you. Someone quite different than you is going to sit next. You never know what you're going to encounter. And he talks about how we encounter alienation when we're in those public spheres. And I always talk about how we want revolution to be like this community of diversity, of diverse thinking. We want people, different political backgrounds, and different ideas and different faith ideas. And, and it's almost like, one of the things that really encouraged me is almost like revolution needs to be a public space. It needs to be like, and I was thinking about how COVID in some ways pushed churches into meeting in parks and meeting into these open spaces. And kind of made the church embrace its alienation, hello, good morning. And it kind of like made us embrace this, like, we're not safe in our house, we're not safe in our church, we've got to go outside, and we've got to be, and you never know what's going to happen. Someone's going to walk their dog, or dog's going to take a crap behind the pastor while he's talking, whatever. My son was playing a soccer game last weekend, and this woman's walking her dog, and she just lets her dog just walk on to part of the soccer field and take a pee. And I'm like, this is great. My son's, the soccer, they're going to have a pee-covered soccer ball, dog pee. But that's the kind of thing of feeling the alienation of not being in a community, being outside. So a community always requires an outsider, and I've seen that so much growing up. Even in my most inclusive groups, there's the outsider as the exclusive, the person who's not inclusive. All of a sudden, the one who's made us outsiders all our lives, now they have become the outsider. And they're saying in a public space, there's just you have no choice of that, you know, in the park. You know, you're with your Assemblies of God family having a, you know, a cookout, and the Muslim family having a birthday, and the, you know, and all the other kids, you know, from all different walks of play. You know, I go to a park because of my kids. That's why you know, I don't just go by to myself and watch kids at the park. Um, but yeah, so you interact with this tension that's always there. One of the things that my mom and I used to always do is we'd go to the mall when we would get stressed out back in the day when the malls were more crowded, and just you kind of people watch. You just kind of sit there, but that's also, you know, in a way, a public space, a space where you just break away from, you know, and where you're actually experience alienation. You know, when we're in our homes and we're in comfort, we've got our Netflix, or we've got a good book, or, you know, we've got our food, and we've got our, you know, blankets, and you know, if your family's there, you have your family. So it's not really experiencing that alienation, even when you're alone, but experience that in public. So I think that's something that introverts, especially, and I'm an introvert, especially deal with quite a bit, is that type of alienation. And it is strange to say, because a lot of people see church as a community, but I've always been such an introverted person that I've always experienced alienation within the church. I have never felt comfortable in the church. And I don't want to think that it's just because it's like, oh, all these religious people, I'm just too cool for school. You know, it was just like, I just never felt like I knew what to say, and that I fit in, you know, and if I was thinking something differently, or like, you know, not agreeing with the confession that they were reading at this one church, or, you know what I mean? And it was, or not, like, oh, I don't really get into the music and I feel oddball, you know, so I'm just going to sit down. Hey, Beth. Charlotte. And so I thought that was interesting, and really worth the look at this, at what Todd McGowan's saying. I was just trying to see maybe if there was some sort of something I marked that we could look at, but let's see. One of the things it says, this is the essential bind that confronts everyone. No one can abandon community and identity altogether, but everyone has the potential to recognize the priority of alienation relative to the attempt to belong. And I was thinking about growing up at Heritage USA when I was a kid. My parents, you know, their church was, you know, had parks and shopping and hotels and campsites and roller skate rinks. I mean, everything was there, you know, so a lot of people spent their vacations there. And also, like, how that alienation in some ways existed. Like, I can remember being in the Grand Hotel at the Main Street, where some of the shops were, and seeing a group of nuns walk down, you know, and going, oh, the Catholics are here, you know, like, always, like, you kind of experienced a strange kind of alienation there, of where you were like, you never knew who you were going to encounter next. And especially because I was a chubby little kid that my dad ran the place, I had cheeks that everybody wanted to squeeze. So that alienation became, oh, look at those chubby cheeks. But I like that idea. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because the other book I was reading, Camus' book, The Rebel, and I'm like, that's such a cliche that I'm reading a book called The Rebel. I got my James Dean jacket on. There's something that really drew me into this book, and I wanted to actually kind of read a little bit from it, you know, and share that with you, because I think this is also really interesting. And I think today, you know, the world's full of rebels, and often we look at, and I don't want to be like the youth pastors, like, I know somebody who was pretty rebellious. I know somebody who was, his name was Jesus. So I'm not trying to be cheesy or anything. But it's true. So like I said, I'm not completely prepared today, so I'm just riffing. We're riffing. It's jazz. It's, you know, free art. One of the things that Camus writes here is this: why rebel if there is nothing permanent in oneself worth serving? It is for the sake of everyone in the world that the slave asserts himself when he comes to the conclusion that a command has infringed on something in him which does not belong to him alone, but which is a common ground where all men, even the man who insults and oppresses him, have a natural community. And so I thought it was interesting because I was reading this stuff on community and what it's like to be, alienated, and how the community always has an outsider. But then you have this rebel who automatically kind of rebels to something that seems injustice. But it's not just injustice for the rebel. It's not just injustice for that person, but they recognize an injustice that they're able to share. That it's a common injustice. That it's an injustice that they share. You want to say, it's kind of an empathetic thing that starts to happen. And even for the one that's opposing their will onto them, he realizes even they are victims of this injustice. And so often when we rebel, it's not just for being like, oh, I'm going to wear a heavy metal shirt to church. It's like, and even that probably have some sort of reason behind it of seeing, like, is there really an unconscious movement in it that's trying to wake something up within that person and within the church. So when you think about these things, that the rebellion often comes when someone recognizes there's injustice, and it's an inclusive injustice. It's the type of it reminds me a lot of Paul's letter to the Galatians. I'll read a little bit more of this book. Of course, I'm skipping around, so you'll have to forgive me. Then we note that rebellion does not arise only and necessary among the oppressed, but that it can also be caused by the mere spectacle of oppression, of which someone else is the victim. In such a case, there is a feeling of identification with another individual. And so often rebellion has empathy within it. And so I'd say one of the things I've been rebelling against lately is really like talking to people about Gaza and Palestine and saying we got to talk more about this, and we should, and it took me too long to come out to talk about it, but I've told you all the reasons, and I think I've been clear about that. But it's not my suffering, but it's seeing other people suffering. Now, it is people suffering based on the fact that my tax dollars and your tax dollars and our tax dollars are paying for the bombs that are killing these human beings. And I've had conversations with people about Israel and things like that. I mean, today there was a huge protest in Israel to release the hostages and to make a peace deal because they don't feel like the hostages are not being seen as important enough reason to, so even the citizens of Israel are angry that there's not a peace treaty now and that the hostages aren't being made a priority. So we have a really bad situation on our hands. And it's kind of rebelling, and right now it's rebelling against that in a way with some people who might have been in my own normal tribe because they're Democrats or they're on the left, and they go, oh, you can't talk, don't point out the problems that this is our group, or don't remind us that Kamala said she's not going to do anything. Don't do that. She said she was, but then she said she's not. All this stuff. Like, you could hurt this, you could hurt that, but you get to the point where you have to rebel. You have to speak out because you see the pain of the other. It's not your pain. It's the other's pain. And then it becomes that this is injustice that has to be, and injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, as Dr. King used to say. So I have to speak out on behalf of these folks. I have to rebel. I have to say I can't toe the line. So that's the thing why I said last week is I always feel like I don't have my own tribe or my own people, because even within my own group, who I often probably am harder on than other groups because I care about it. I care about them in that way, that I don't want to see them make similar mistakes that I saw the church make growing up, is try to speak out. And that's tough. I mean, it's really tough. It's really tough for me. I have to remember that it took me time, because there are people that I see who I know love social justice, love equal rights, love peace, and all this, and I've known them my whole life, and I'm actually surprised that I'm saying something before they are, and I'm actually surprised that they're remaining quiet, and and they don't even want to talk to me about it, and almost seem disappointed that I am speaking about it. It's unusual, and I'm not saying they're bad people, because a lot of people aren't doing that right now. So I'm just having to try to find empathy for them as well, but I also have to follow my own convictions, and that's a tough place to be at times. But that's part of being a rebel, and and it's not like in a cool way, you know. I'm not trying to say like, oh, being a rebel is cool, you know. I'm trying to say that sometimes it's just necessary, or sometimes it's, for some people, they can't deny it. To do so would be sin in a way, a separation. To do so would be to be untrue to oneself. And so that's often a hard task, is to be the one who feels that they need to speak out on the behalf of others suffering, especially when it's not directly affecting you. But you know, when we talked about the prodigal son, not the prodigal son, I'm sorry, we talked about the Good Samaritan, and the Good Samaritan had to ask the question when he reached out to this person who would have seen him as an enemy and seen him as an outcast. He had to ask himself, not what's going to happen to me if I stop and help this person, but what's going to happen to this person, what's going to happen to them if I don't stop and help them. And in the same way, I would say then that question begins over again of, you know, what's going to happen to me if I don't stop and help them? And, you know, like, there's something that happens within ourselves when we aren't able to worry and put the others over our own needs. When we're seeing suffering and we're not able to put our, you know, it speaks loudly of of where we're at in life, and our fears and our insecurities. I was going to say character, but I don't mean it to assassinate a character, like, or to be like our character's bad, but it just means that maybe in our character we have a lot of fear. Unconsciously, we're worried about, you know, what's going to happen, you know, and it just shows that we're complex human beings with a lot of nuances, you know. That's why we talk about like dialects and contradictions, because we're all going to have those things within us, you know, and they're alive. And it's tough when people point them out, and it's tough when we go like, hey, I'm surprised you're not, you know, saying anything, or I'm surprised that we can't have this conversation right now. So, you know, it's something to be sensitive about. I've had some interesting conversations with people in my DMs and my direct messages about this. I did have to block someone the other day because it was just, we weren't getting anywhere, and it was getting so heated that I felt like we were discounting each other's humanity as well. And I hate when that happens. But anyway, I want to read a little bit more about this. And this is all going somewhere, because I'm going to read something to you that I wrote down that I was going to try to like subtly write within a talk, but I'm going to give you like the raw footage, the raw art of what it was. But I'm going to continue to read just a couple more spots in this, and then we'll hit that, because I feel like it's the setup. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Nor is it a question of the feeling of a community of interest. Injustice done to men whom we consider enemies can actually be profoundly repugnant to us. Now I'm going to read that again, because I think it's really important, so turn those ears on. Nor is the question of the feeling of a community of interests. Injustice done to men whom we consider enemies can actually be profoundly repugnant to us. So even the rebel will see that when their own enemy is being mistreated, when their own enemy is being torn apart, that even that is something to rebel against. That this is, you know, we don't want to kill and destroy. I don't want to see my enemy become homeless. I don't want to see my enemy have bombs dropped on them. I don't want to see my enemy lose members of their family, lose their children. So often that can be a rebellious act. Often when I've seen things written about prisoners and things like that online, and you see people being like, yeah, I hope they rot in hell and things like that. And I've never been able to have that I've never really tried to carry that into my way of thinking. And I think it's because of my mom, actually. I was thinking about this the other day. It's like my mom never met an enemy. She had enemies and she met them, but when she met them, in her mind, they were never enemies. They were always going to be won over, or she was going to introduce them, or she always felt that, oh, there's just misinformation, so let's get to know each other, You don't know me yet, so let me introduce myself and let me tell you about myself, and I always found that really interesting, is that she was always disarming people who were coming to attack her, even with preachers and things like that. She could make a funny joke. There's this scene in the Broadway show, and Jerry Falwell talks about having and my heart was hard and blah 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 and all this stuff, and he's talking about being sick, I think, and then my mom goes, "Oh, Jerry, that's just always been you," and it was like this kind of like joke to where this moment where my mother was really captured in this musical of all things, where I saw this, where she was always just disarming the tension within the moment. The pain. There was always like a way for her not always to find some sort of common ground, even if it was through humor or being silly or campy, to disarm these attacks. And I've seen her attacked by all sorts of people and always disarm them. So for me, I guess that got stuck in my brain and in my unconscious and in my mind, is this idea of, I have to even defend my enemies, like I even have to love my enemies and make sure that we're not destroying them completely. Well, Jay, they destroyed these people. Yeah, but we're not going to return the favor. That's what grace is about. That's what restoration is about. That's when Paul said, beware of biting and devouring one another. Beware that you aren't consumed by each other. There'll be nothing left. It's like a kingdom divided. I'll read this last part, and then I'll go into this little part, and we'll be done. But one envies what one does not have. Why the rebel's aim is to defend what he is, he does not merely claim some good that he does not possess or which he was depraved. His aim is to claim recognition for something which he has and which he has already been recognized by him. In almost every case, as more important than anything of which he could be envious. Rebellious. So it's this idea of, I'm going to try to grasp this idea. His aim is to claim recognition for something which has already been recognized in him, in almost every case as more important than anything which he could be envious. So it says he's not envious of something, but what he's wanting to do is say, this rebel is saying, let's say it was a slave who said, I'm not going to believe my master. I'm not going to listen to this master anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. This is unjust. And what he wants to see is not to be recognized for it, but to realize, like, this has always been in me. This injustice has always been within me, to see this injustice. And not only do I need to be free from this injustice, but all humans need to be free of this injustice, including the master. So to me, I think it's always important to see when someone's rebelling against something and look at it deeper. Sometimes, people who, John Lydon, or you might know as Johnny Rotten, says things that are offensive, and sometimes he wore a Make America Great shirt again years ago, and people were really pissed at him. But I'd listen to him talk sometimes, because I really always thought he was a very interesting person, and I don't have to agree with everybody I find to be completely interesting. But I would realize that there was often a purpose behind what he was saying, or what he was trying to make people think, or his truth, or what was there. And it wasn't always what we assume. We always assume this thing, but in his rebellion, he was trying to say, well, remember what we were, are we still that? Or are we becoming the very thing that we hate? It's really kind of deep when you look into this stuff. So oftentimes, if we listen a little bit, we can hear why the rebellion is there, and realize that the rebellion might not necessarily be to hurt you or hurt me, but to recognize that there's something, there might be a pain there, or there's something greater there. Like there's like, oh, okay, he's noticing that conservatives are canceling, I mean, liberals are canceling people and judging people and creating in groups, and in his own way he's saying that's not what we were, so I don't want to be that if that's what we're becoming. So for us to look beyond some shock value to go into what's the deeper message here. And that's what I like about philosophy and stuff like Slavoj Žižek, because he'll say something that seems really offensive, but then you read his books, then he starts taking it all apart, and you start to go, oh, I see that. Or in this book, where it's talking about, well, community always needs someone on the outside. So you go, oh, is community all bad? And he goes, no, we're going to go deeper than that. We're going to go down to all the levels of why and what and where we need to be, and embracing our difference, embracing our alienation, and realizing that alienation does not just mean that we're home alone, but we're really alienated when we're in the public park, when we're on the bus together, when we're experiencing things. And how do we handle alienation, and how do we see that, and how do we interact with the stranger? So to me, those are concepts that kind of blow my mind, and I'm sure we'll cover a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more prepared on my behalf as over the next few weeks. But here are some things that I was writing down as I've been reading some of these books, and I just want to share with you the really raw thoughts. So remember that. And there's stuff that I'm just trying to work through, but I like to try to write down things that I think. And a few more things on the rebel thing, though. It's hard not to be a rebel in this world, especially when you see so many people suffering from poverty. So many, you see our countries just continue spending billions and billions on wars and violence. It's hard not to be a rebel. And I think it's okay to be a rebel. Also, for me, the Bible alone, with the issues that must be spoken of, like when we talk about the Apostle Paul and his writings and what aren't writings, and other books in the Bible that might have contradictions and things like that, it doesn't make the Bible any less more important to me. It's still as valuable as it ever was. But those are things that need to be talked about, because I was talking with someone yesterday, and he said, my parents sent me to this missions thing and had me read the Bible, and that was the agreement. I would read the Bible and then come back and talk to them. And I read the Bible, and I read the whole New Testament like they asked me, and what I decided was it wasn't for me, and I was done. It just didn't make sense, and there was just too much weirdness and all this stuff. And I automatically want to go in and be like, well, the pastoral epistles aren't Paul. You want to start going in and telling these people, kind of help them, like, well, yeah, you were probably right, because you were seeing things that don't line up, but no one told you that these things aren't right. You want to communicate that truth to them, which is kind of your truth and your rebellion. And as they rebel and say, oh, you don't have to rebel like that, because there's a deeper truth there, and you can't do that overnight. But people need to know those things, and we have to stand up and kind of be rebellious in that way if we want to reclaim the good news and the gospel, and go like, there was always been something here that was right, but there's other things that aren't right. So we need to look like, and it's really interesting. That's why I love scholarship, is because often those things I feel like I've rebelled against, or sometimes I found out to be forgeries or things like that. You go, oh, okay. Hierarchy is not really a biblical idea. The values of this country must be rebelled against often, because I just talked to somebody who's like has really great health insurance, and they said they're still having to pay $5,000 to their insurance company for a surgery they had. And they're like, and I had really good insurance, and it's like, there's problems. And so we need to speak out about these things. Honestly, I think we should be speaking out now more than ever, because it is during a political season that people are actually listening, and the politicians are a little bit more nervous than usual, which I think is probably a good way to communicate to them. But I feel like a lot of folks disagree with me on that. So here's some things I wrote about inclusion and the struggles that we're going to have with inclusion. And speaking of true inclusion. So buckle up, because these are just thoughts that I had writing down like a journal or anything like that. These are just thoughts as I've read the book. I wrote these down. So I'm going to share those who are pretty raw. True inclusion will always have disagreements. So if we want to have true inclusion, true community, there's always going to be disagreements within that community. And if we include people, there's always going to be friction within true inclusion. It would be like, if you say we really want inclusion, all people are equal, and then I'm like, all right, well, we're going to pick a random bus. I'm going to put you on that bus, and you're going to practice inclusion with every single person on that bus. Good luck. And just depending on what part of area, town, where I go, where we do, I'm going to take you to a public park, and you're going to find 5 people to practice inclusion with today. Think about that. That's like, no. And I wrote down, that's why we talk of disagreeing well and grace. It's so funny that I'm always thinking of the kind of we area of what we at Revolution are talking about and dealing with and stuff, but that's what I wrote down. That's why we talk about disagreeing well and grace. True inclusion and freedom cannot avoid difference and diversity of the mind, like an actual diversity of the mind. It's just true inclusion. If you really want to include people, you're going to have people in your life who disagree with you. So, people, I had to get those toxic people. Toxic people or these people. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have toxic people out of your life, and there's certain people you shouldn't have more boundaries with than others. But I'm just saying, like, let's just be honest and lay it out there about inclusion. Are you really inclusive, or are you selectively inclusive, just like other people that are selectively inclusive? You just include the other people that they don't include, and they include the people that you don't include. But there's no pure inclusion, right? Because to have a real community, you have to have a group that is excluded because you're going, this is the community, or a safe space. Especially if you have a safe space, there's a lot of people excluded from that safe space. So that safe space, ironically, is only a safe space for particular people, So, it would be a lot different if you went to an Assemblies of God and had a safe space, or an MCC church and there was a safe space. You're going to have 2 different types of people within that space that are considered safe. And there are going to be people who are completely excluded from that place because that place would not be safe to them at all. And then I wrote this just about, I was thinking about, freedom and growing up in America and just the struggle with that, and that inclusion, and the inclusion that I thought that the United States represented was this. Freedom protects everyone in order to practice pure equality. Now, we would say America doesn't really do that, and the government it doesn't always really do that, of course. But the ideal, all people are created equal, that type of thing. Ironically, there were slaves at that time. So, but we tried to learn from that and grow on that and change and evolve into that truth. It's like, here's a truth, now let's evolve into that truth. But, freedom to protect everyone in order to practice pure equality means that we're going to have people who don't agree with us, don't think that our life is good, who think we're going to hell or think we're going somewhere else, or think we're fools for even believing in gods or a god or religion or anything like that. These people are going to be completely included. And that's tough. So when we say we're inclusive, I think we have to really, like I always say, don't put an asterisk on grace, because grace is anarchy. But, you always hear a lot of people on the left do these things of like, are they really an inclusive church? And then they'll say the language, and point out the irony of like why these, evangelicals who are just trying to get numbers aren't really inclusive. Like, well, when you want to join the staff or you want to do this, But I would say that the left also has those same type of rules. They're just unspoken, Oh, yeah, we're completely inclusive, But are you really? Are you really, really inclusive? Are you, fighting for the protections of people to discriminate against you? And not to, and that's the thing. That's the world we live in. Is freedom is uncomfortable. Inclusion is always going to be extremely uncomfortable, and that's why we talk about disagreeing well and showing grace, just to make it a little less uncomfortable, to make life in general and living life on life's terms, not and how we want it to be, not how we think it should be, because I have ideas of what I think life should be and how it should be and how we should treat each other, but that's just not, everybody doesn't agree with me. A lot of people don't agree with me. So that's okay, because I live in a world where I'm able to have freedom of thought and freedom of speech and to have these things and talk about these things. It doesn't mean it's going to make me popular, or it might make me not popular, it might, get me canceled, whatever. But still, the idea is, if we're really practicing inclusion, then we've got to be like these people saying, like, okay, I'm going to embrace this grace, or I'm going to embrace that, like, Tammy Faye mentality of, like, don't judge me until you meet me. I'm more than my sexuality. I'm more than the color of my skin. I'm more than my religion. I'm more than my identity is not just, oh, I'm a punk rock preacher, or I'm a kid who has famous parents, or any of that stuff. It's saying, like, we're bigger than that. My identity lies within humanity. I agree with Paul where he says there's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, free or slave. And so when we do that, some of our defenses come down a little bit, And so if you see someone judging you, let's say, like, if you're a drag queen, and someone, you could just, oh, hi, honey. But, I'm more than just a drag queen. I'm also this. I remember when I actually got invited to a drag show when I was in LA 20 some odd years ago by RuPaul. And I was RuPaul's guest at this show. And one of the drag queens comes out. Well, I went outside to have a smoke. This is back when I still smoked. And a drag queen comes out, and she's got an Eiffel Tower. Or they have an Eiffel Tower on their head. And he starts telling me about how he was a pastor's kid and grew up in the church and all this stuff and this whole story. And so, as though I may have not related to being 6 foot tall with an Eiffel Tower on my head, performing as a woman, I still had more in common with this drag queen than I did with a lot of people who I were working with in LA, doing a documentary, doing a show, and doing all this. I had more. Our backgrounds were very similar. We liked similar music. We both had been hurt by the church in very similar ways, and so it was like one of these things where it was like, it's so easy to judge someone if they come up to you, a 6 foot tall man dressed as a woman with a drag queen with a Eiffel Tower on their head, and go, oh no, we're not going to have anything in common. And then, I'm cool. I'm out here smoking my cigarette, my leather jacket, and then you go like, oh, wow, we have a lot in common, And that's the beautiful thing about humanity. Interesting things about humanity. I don't know how many people I've had arguments and disagreed well, and then, like, ended up becoming friends with and realizing how much more we had in common and things like that. But like I said, this is an unfinished work that I'm working on right now, but I just want to say, like, inclusion is going to require a lot from you. And I say you as the individual because sometimes your group is going to say, your group's identity is going to say, well, our community is not really, that we don't embrace those people. And I think that's when we go, okay, maybe I need to practice a little alienation sometimes and see if I can find common ground with human beings if we want to be truly inclusive. And I mean, that would be the goal of revolution. Do I think it's possible? No, I don't think it's possible to be completely inclusive. There's always going to be someone who you exclude, or someone who you just can't, work with. And that's always, I hope that there's other. That's one of the things I liked about being in Atlanta, is knowing other groups where I could be like, plug people into other places when they didn't necessarily fit into what we were doing. Because I don't think anybody can cover one place and being completely inclusive. But I think it's a goal to work at and something for us to think about. So those are two different things, right? So I've talked about the rebel, but I guess maybe being the rebel is recognizing the lack of inclusion even in places that claim complete inclusion, and realizing that that's almost an impossible claim. And that almost, grace can't have an asterisk, but inclusion can have an asterisk, even if it's unspoken. And those rules and things are often unspoken until you see something, something happens. I remember my friend Lawrence Richardson had a young man who came to his church, and he had wore a Make America Great Again hat. And this was his rebellion against his mainline progressive denomination was, I'm going to wear a Make America Great, And the reason I know this is because Pastor Lawrence, a black man who is transgender, took a picture with him and loved him and said, thank you for being here and expressing your truth and all this. And to me, I'm like, okay, well, there's inclusion. Pastor Lawrence Richardson, if you got to follow this guy on Instagram or on Facebook or wherever, because he's great. He's so Christ-like, it blows my mind. But he embraced this young man who felt like he needed to rebel because he knew there was got to be some truth to this kid's rebellion. And maybe this kid was going like, oh, you guys talk about inclusion. Well, let me see how far. And Pastor Lawrence proved it. And people got mad that Pastor Lawrence embraced this kid. And the people who were mad at him were the people who were like, those churches aren't really inclusive. So you see, we kind of live in that. And I'm not here to say that these people are bad people. What I'm here to say is we're all human. We all fall short. We all make mistakes. We're activating out of hurt and pain. There are people that I just am no good to talk to and minister to because I've been hurt by that type of person and I might not react well. I mean, there are people that I'm just not great with. And that's very few, but there are still those people. And we all have that. So none of us have going to reach perfection with an inclusion. But grace we can always have. Because grace we can even have at a distance. Like remember, love your enemies, do good to those, be kind to those who persecute you, pray for them. So you might be like, I can't be kind to the person persecuting me. And I don't know if I can include them, but I can pray for them. Even if you don't believe in prayer, just give it a try. Just go, bless their hearts, but bless their hearts to something bigger than yourself. So those are my thoughts today, my unfinished, unconstructed thoughts. And from some of these great philosophers, and none of them are theologians. Those are all 3 philosophy books. From philosophers, don't tell anybody. And growing up, evangelical philosophers were you don't want to meditate because you don't want to have your brain too free, but you also don't want to read philosophy because you don't want to have your brain filled up with too much stuff. It was like kind of like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Anyhow, so yeah, that's where we're at. I'm excited. Like I'm working this part-time job, so this is kind of making me think differently and do work differently and do that, but also helps me pay bills, so that's great. Hey, talking about paying bills, Revolution has to pay bills, and just real quick, I don't want to hammer into this, but I want to tell you one of the things that happened with our accountants. Now, when I say accountants, because we have a company that we work with, and so we had a guy that worked with us for a really long time, and Frank, and he passed away, and so now we have somebody else handling our accountants, okay? So I got a call, I got an email saying, hey, Jay, we're putting the payroll through. And I said, okay, but you need to raise another $100 before Wednesday. Oh, okay, thank you so much. And then like an hour and a half later, I get, oh, hey, Jay, we went ahead and paid our bill that you owed us, and you're actually a few bills behind, so we only put one through. And I was like, oh, great. And I got really nervous. And so now you're going to need to raise $400 more and $100. Now, I got really frustrated with them, and I said, listen, why aren't you guys on the same page? Did you not tell the person who deposited the check, who did that? I got really frustrated because it's just, and I said, I don't know if I can raise that much money in a few days. And that's by Wednesday. So we need to raise $400 more by Wednesday. So there's the need. I'll put that out there. But we had this conversation, and then they were like, well, they said, if we cancel the check, we're going to have to do more work, which is going to cost us more time to put on your thing, and you're going to owe us more money. So that was a situation I found myself in this week. That's sometimes I feel like I'm actually working for the accountants more than I am for Revolution, because they're like, oh, you got to do this. So one of the things I'm going to put out there for some of you folks is maybe if you know some folks who are accountants and who know how to do all the tax stuff and make sure every jot and tittle is done, you could recommend a place that maybe could work with Revolution, because it might be time for us to get new accountants, and just so we could be better organized. I share that with you just so you can kind of know where I'm at. You know, I'm dealing with that kind of stuff. I'm dealing with other stuff, being dad and things like that, and trying to get all these talks together. But Revolution, as always, and we'd much rather have you than your money, but could use your support. And we need to raise $400 by Wednesday, or the payroll gets canceled and it costs us more money because of that. And I don't understand why that is the problem, but that is the problem. So there you go. I'm going to put that out there and let you know we have a need. And if you're in a place where you can help us meet that need, we'd be grateful for that. Every little bit helps. But yeah, so thank you for following us. Thank you for watching today. Thanks for liking and subscribing. And let's try to live the life of inclusion. Let's try to test ourselves a little bit and think about that, and maybe just even, like, if you do have a safe space, talk about the irony of inclusion and that kind of thing, and the ironies of even safe spaces. For it depends on the people in the spaces, and have these conversations. I'm not trying to reinvent the church or reinvent the wheel necessarily, but I'm just trying to help us all have better critical thinking. And to think more about these situations and to think deeper about them, and why you don't need, I don't think you need to be afraid to rebel, because I think when you do rebel and when you do push against the system, you're often just saying there's something here that needs to change, and you're not, we're not like Camus was saying, it's like, it's not just for us, it's also that we don't go after our enemies. It's also to help the enemies learn the correct information, and for them to experience justice and to practice justice as well. So it's really something that is grace for everyone, and something that is uniquely leads us to a type of change, of repentance, if you will, into the right direction of grace and inclusion and love, loving each other more, and being, making the world a little bit of a better place, hopefully for everyone. And when we change these leaders we disagree with, think about the people under them and how wonderful that is for those folks to be able to have a little bit more inclusion and love and grace and things like that. So that's why we try to speak truth, even when it seems like it's a rebellion. It really is for hopefully for a better good for everyone. Complete inclusion, not just those in the Jesus camp or the Christian camp or the liberal camp or the conservative camp. It's everybody. It's humanity. There's no identifier here on people. So there you go. Love you guys. Hopefully check out Revolution's Instagram and Facebook and YouTube during the week, where I throw up a little vignettes when I get time. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're listening to the podcast, don't forget to leave a 5-star review for the podcast. All right, everybody. Bye-bye. Love you all. See you later.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.